said, you know what, Adrian, if you ever go on a talk show or a TV show, we can hire a hitman, have your neck slit. They'll never find your body. We can hire a sniper to take you out.
Michael Jackson's Neverland Maid, Adrian McManus, just revealed the shocking secrets of Michael Jackson. An explosive disclosure that sent ripples through the media, reignited public scrutiny, and reopened old wounds. The moment she stepped forward, the shimmer of Michael Jackson's fairy tale facade began to crumble, replaced by a shadow that had lingered just out of sight. The long-standing mystique of a man hailed as the eternal boy was suddenly stained with revelations that cast Neverland not as a fantasy haven, but as a meticulously constructed stage for secrecy. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. Adrian McManus, who served as maid at Neverland Ranch throughout the early 1990s, tore through the myth with claims that pierced the heart of Jackson's crafted persona. Her account asserted that she witnessed more than the whimsical toys and trains. She alleged that hidden within the playful decor were surveillance mechanisms, missing tapes, and unexplained behavior that suggested neither innocence nor fantasy, but calculated concealment. The very features that defined Neverland, the secret corridors, alarmed doors, one-way mirrors, rigged clocks, gained new significance as facilitators of privacy and control, tools in a larger design to obscure the disturbing realities unfolding behind closed doors. She spoke of the unsettling warnings embedded in the physical structure, bells that trilled unexpectedly, designed to alert someone before anyone could intrude. These alarms, woven into the architecture, cast Neverland's master suite not merely as a place of refuge or fantasy, but as a highly controlled environment engineered to protect something deeply troubling. Hidden bedrooms, secret passageways, and even a movie theater outfitted with one-way glass were no longer symbols of entertainment, but devices that enabled surveillance without detection, turning spaces of innocence into instruments of manipulation. Even more damning was the suggestion that Jackson had secretly recorded his time with children, footage that, if real, could profoundly alter public understanding of him. McManus claimed that videotapes exist featuring Jackson with children, possibly including two of his later accusers, Wade Robson and James Safechuck. Though these recordings have never surfaced, she insisted they remain hidden, their existence a potential linchpin in ongoing legal battles against Jackson's estate. The very act of revealing such secrets sent shockwaves through media and legal landscapes. It challenged deeply held beliefs about Jackson's public image and reignited debate over Neverland's true nature. For many, the revelations validated long-surfacing suspicions, underscoring how absurdity and cruelty might coexist behind the pastel enchantment. For others, they posed unsettling ethical questions. How many were complicit? How could silence, whether born of fear, manipulation, or loyalty, have allowed such secrets to fester? McManus herself became a controversial figure. Her testimony did not fall onto an innocent stage. During Jackson's 2005 criminal trial, she had provided statements under oath, denying any misconduct when previously asked by investigators. Years later, she reversed course, explaining that fear had frozen her truth. She disclosed witnessing inappropriate touching of children, even naming Macaulay Culkin among them. Yet her credibility was swiftly attacked by defense attorneys who brought up lawsuits she had filed against Jackson, prior theft convictions, and media payments. The audience found itself split. Was she a whistleblower stifled by intimidation, or someone seeking vengeance through sensational claims? Even so, the core of McManus's new revelations carried weight in broader cultural discourse. The mere possibility of hidden recordings and rigged architecture framed Neverland as a house of manipulation and deception, rather than whimsy. Each piece, the missing hard drives, the concrete mechanisms of concealment, became a symbol of a hidden reality running parallel to public fantasy, a reality molded and maintained within the ranch's walls. The implications of the maid's revelations were extensive. Jurists and litigants viewed them as potential catalysts for legal reassessment. The accusations of secret tapes, if ever substantiated, could become powerful evidence in pending or future suits. Indeed, such evidence would pierce the veil of ambiguity and shift the foundation of legal claims. Meanwhile, for society, the disclosures triggered a moral reckoning. They demanded clarity on how fame, childhood, and power had interwound within Neverland, and how they had shielded or obscured potential harm. Adrian McManus did not simply recount observations. She brought the architecture of the ranch, the psychological environment, and the system of protection into sharp relief. In her narrative, Neverland's design emerged as symbolic, lavish on the surface, but internally orchestrated to guard secrets. The combination of toy-strewn hallways with surveillance sensors suggests an environment coded for both play and concealment, where innocence was curated even as control was enforced. What made these revelations even more potent was their timing. Decades had passed since the original allegations of 1993 and the criminal trial of 2005. McManus's interview, broadcast in the mid-2020s, reopened public consciousness at a moment when societal awareness of abuse and power imbalances had shifted dramatically. The retrospective framing made the disclosures resonate differently, highlighting the persistence of doubt, the fragility of reputation, and the long shadows cast by silence. Her decision to come forward also spoke to courage and rupture. It breached a long decade of dormancy. The glow of Jackson's image, while tarnished, remained potent. Yet McManus stepped into that space, risking backlash, legal attack, and public scorn. In doing so, she disrupted the equilibrium of memory, refusing narrative control and asserting that memory, however fraught, must speak its truth. The story did not end with one revelation. It morphed into something larger, an allegory of how institutions and individuals can conspire to polish a legend while hiding its fractures. Neverland ceased to be just a ranch. It became a metaphor for deep concealment built on innocence. Every concealed corridor, every taped door, every untraceable recording became a fragment of that metaphor. Echoes of her story lingered in the corridors of discourse. Investigations into Jackson's estate were renewed, legal strategies adjusted, and public narrative shifted. The cultural conversation refocused on how celebrity can mask dysfunction and how denial can persist even when the architecture of truth is visible. McManus, though contested, had catalyzed a reckoning. The revelation by Adrian McManus was less about the details she shared and more about the cracks she exposed in a carefully constructed myth. Through her eyes, Neverland became a site of duality, laughter and shadows, fantasy and fear, childhood dreams, and adult betrayals. Her disclosure shattered illusions and demanded that the world reckon with harder questions about innocence, protection, and the strange interplay between power and secrecy within the legend of Michael Jackson. The revelations from Adrian McManus unfolded with a sense of measured shock, as though each layer of her account had been deliberately timed to dismantle the facade of Neverland piece by piece. Once the initial statements began to circulate, the focus shifted to an intricate unpacking of what these claims meant when examined through the lens of power, celebrity culture, and the isolation that can grow around both. Every detail she described took on a life of its own, becoming a puzzle piece in a larger portrait of a private world that the public had only glimpsed through carefully staged images. The nature of her disclosures invited deeper examination of Neverland's physical and emotional architecture. In the public imagination, the ranch had long been painted as a whimsical sanctuary, where the rules of adulthood were suspended. Yet in McManus's retelling, those same spaces acquired new, disquieting meanings. The train rides, which once seemed like a charming indulgence, could be reframed as a means of controlling access to certain areas of the property. Vast lawns and playful statues might not have been simply decorative, but rather barriers and boundaries, separating visitors from what lay beyond. The multi-acre spread under her account became not a playground but a maze, meticulously designed so that the master of the estate could move unseen, monitor activity, and choose who was permitted into his inner sanctums. The employment dynamic within Neverland also became a point of intense speculation in light of her statements. McManus's position as a maid placed her in a unique vantage point, close enough to observe private moments, but not close enough to influence the environment she worked in. Her job required constant movement through rooms and hallways that were otherwise off-limits to outsiders, allowing her to notice patterns in Jackson's behavior and the routines of his guests. It became clear that the staff, regardless of title, operated under a rigidly controlled system. Loyalty was prized above transparency, and stepping out of line could result in swift removal. The implication was that the ranch operated less like a household and more like a controlled compound, where trust was conditional and secrecy was embedded into the daily operations. Examining her claims through the framework of celebrity culture reveals another layer of complexity. Michael Jackson's fame was not simply a matter of chart-topping singles or sold-out tours. It was a cultural phenomenon that generated an almost mythical level of adoration. This aura of perfection made it difficult for anyone, especially an employee, to speak out without fear of public backlash. McManus's allegations, therefore, did not just address specific incidents, they illuminated the broader challenge of holding someone so globally beloved accountable. Even the act of listening to such accusations became, for many fans, an exercise in cognitive dissonance. Her descriptions of the inner workings of Neverland suggested that every element of the property served dual purposes. A movie theater might function as a space for entertainment, yet its unusual features, a control room with concealed viewing windows for instance, hinted at intentions beyond mere amusement. Bedrooms that appeared oversized and inviting could be strategically situated to offer both privacy and quick access to escape routes or alarmed passageways. These architectural details, when stripped of their whimsical context, began to resemble the trappings of control and surveillance more than hospitality. The broader implications extended to how the entertainment industry shields its most valuable stars. McManus's revelations prompted renewed discussion about the role of gatekeepers, managers, attorneys, and publicists, who can create an impermeable barrier between a celebrity and the outside world. This isolation, while protecting the star's brand, can also allow misconduct to flourish unchecked. In the case of Neverland, McManus's account suggested that not only the walls of the property, but also the walls of celebrity itself served to keep unwanted scrutiny at bay. Her narrative also sparked conversations about the psychological toll of working within such an environment. The emotional strain of witnessing behavior she believed was inappropriate, yet feeling powerless to intervene, could not be understated. Staff in similar positions often describe a sense of moral paralysis, trapped between their need for employment and their awareness of troubling conduct. In McManus's case, this paralysis was amplified by the knowledge that she was up against one of the most powerful cultural figures of the era, whose reach extended far beyond the gates of Neverland. The secrecy she described was not confined to physical spaces or hush-hush staff protocols. It seeped into the rhythms of daily life. The ordering of meals, the scheduling of visitors, and the rotation of staff all seemed orchestrated to maintain a tightly curated image of the estate. Public appearances by Jackson were synchronized with a carefully timed influx of certain guests, creating a spectacle that distracted from whatever else might have been occurring in private. This level of control suggested that the fantasy of Neverland was not just an aesthetic choice, but a calculated performance. In analyzing her account, one cannot ignore the symbolism embedded in the name Neverland itself. The reference to the fictional world of Peter Pan, where children never grow up, was once seen as a charming nod to Jackson's whimsical persona. Under McManus's lens, however, it began to feel unsettlingly literal. A world where the rules of age, authority, and maturity could be bent or erased entirely. This reframing invited questions about how much of the ranch's theme was mere branding and how much was a deliberate attempt to create an environment that blurred boundaries in ways that suited its owner. The notion of blurred boundaries also extended to the relationships McManus claimed to have observed between Jackson and his young guests. While her detractors have pointed to inconsistencies in her past statements, the specificity of her more recent descriptions reignited debates about grooming, power dynamics, and the subtle ways in which inappropriate relationships can be normalized in cloistered environments. Her account suggested that the very extravagance of Neverland, the rides, the candy, the endless gifts, could serve as both an attraction and a distraction, drawing attention away from the less visible interactions taking place. From a sociological perspective, McManus's revelations offered a case study in how environments can be engineered to sustain secrecy. Neverland's physical expanse allowed for the compartmentalization of activities, so that one group of people could be entirely unaware of what was happening elsewhere on the property. Combined with the presence of loyal staff who either did not see or chose not to see certain things, this created a self-contained world where reality could be bent to the will of its central figure. Her disclosures also raised the question of how memory operates in such contexts. Working in an environment that demands silence can cause memories to become compartmentalized, emerging only when triggered by certain events or conversations. This could explain why McManus, decades after leaving Neverland, began to recount details with a clarity that had not been present in earlier testimonies. The act of speaking out in itself might have unlocked recollections that had long been suppressed. The legal implications of her statements were significant. Allegations of hidden recordings, for example, could, if ever substantiated, open pathways for renewed investigation. Even without physical evidence, the mere suggestion of such material served to reframe ongoing legal disputes involving Jackson's estate. Lawyers could cite her claims as a rationale for pursuing new discovery, while opponents could use her past inconsistencies to undermine the credibility of her account. Her revelations became both a potential asset and a liability in the courtroom. For the public, the revelations also forced a reconsideration of Michael Jackson's legacy. While this did not constitute the aftermath in terms of public or legal outcomes, the immediate impact was the fracturing of a cultural narrative that had been carefully preserved. Fans were forced to confront a version of Jackson that clashed with their cherished memories, and media outlets were compelled to revisit long-archived material in search of corroboration or contradiction. The result was a momentary state of uncertainty, where the myth and the man seemed irreconcilable. McManus's position as a former insider gave her account a weight that outside speculation could never achieve. She was not relying on second-hand stories or tabloid rumors. She was speaking from within the walls of the estate, describing sights and sounds that she claimed to have experienced firsthand. Whether or not every detail could be proven, the texture of her narrative, rooted in the everyday operations of Neverland, made it difficult to dismiss entirely. Another dimension of her revelations concerned the performative aspect of Jackson's generosity. The extravagant gifts, lavish parties, and spontaneous outings that captivated guests could also be interpreted as mechanisms of influence. By creating a constant sense of wonder and indebtedness, Jackson could maintain a degree of loyalty that discouraged questions or dissent. McManus's portrayal of this dynamic invited comparisons to other historical figures who used charm and spectacle as tools of control. The role of the media in amplifying or muting such revelations was another layer worth exploring. In earlier decades, celebrity journalism often shied away from challenging narratives that were profitable for both the star and the publications covering them. McManus's willingness to speak out in a media landscape more attuned to investigative scrutiny meant that her words carried further than they might have in the past. However, the persistence of fan loyalty also meant that her account was met with immediate resistance from certain quarters, creating a polarized reception that mirrored the broader cultural divide over Jackson's image. Within the ranch itself, her descriptions suggested an interplay between opulence and secrecy that bordered on theatrical. Rooms were adorned with priceless art and rare collectibles, yet some of these spaces were rarely shown to visitors. McManus hinted that these private areas were not simply for the owner's enjoyment, but served as secluded zones for interactions that would not withstand public exposure. This duality, spaces of beauty that masked potential wrongdoing, the idea of time at Neverland also took on symbolic weight. McManus noted how days and nights seemed to blur together in the constant cycle of activity. Without the typical rhythms of ordinary life, boundaries could be further eroded. Special events might stretch late into the night, sleep schedules shifted unpredictably, and the absence of external oversight allowed the ranch to operate on its own clock. In such an environment, normal social cues could be disrupted, making it easier for questionable behavior to escape notice or challenge. Her depiction of the staff hierarchy illuminated yet another layer of control. While there were numerous employees, not all held equal access to Jackson or certain areas of the estate. Trusted aides might be privy to the inner workings of the household, while others, like gardeners or kitchen staff, were kept deliberately at a distance from sensitive spaces. This segregation of roles ensured that no single staff member had a complete picture of life inside Neverland, thereby reducing the risk of damaging disclosures. From a psychological standpoint, McManus's account underscored how environments of extreme privilege can distort perceptions of normalcy. What might have seemed unusual or even alarming in an ordinary home could, in the context of Neverland, be reframed as part of its eccentric charm. Guests and staff alike might rationalize peculiar arrangements or behaviors as mere quirks of the owner's personality, rather than as warning signs. This normalization effect is a powerful force, and her decision to break away from it years later highlights the difficulty of speaking out from within such a bubble. The sheer scale of Neverland allowed for an almost cinematic level of scene crafting. Each arrival was an event, each departure a carefully managed transition. McManus's recollections suggested that this was not incidental, but part of a broader strategy to keep the ranch's narrative tightly controlled. Visitors might be shown one version of Neverland, full of joy and spectacle, while other activities unfolded far from their view. This bifurcated reality was sustained by the property's physical expanse, the loyalty of select staff, and the unassailable image of its owner. In revealing these elements, McManus not only offered a personal account, but also opened a window into the mechanics of secrecy itself. Her descriptions showed how architecture, culture, and psychology can intertwine to protect a central figure from scrutiny. The implications extended far beyond Michael Jackson, serving as a cautionary tale about the environments that can emerge when immense fame and wealth converge with isolation and control. The scale and intricacy of Adrian McManus's descriptions compelled attention to aspects of Neverland Ranch that had been largely ignored in the broader cultural conversation. One of the most striking threads to emerge from her account was the way the property functioned as both a self-contained universe and a fortress. From the moment visitors passed through the ornate gates, they entered a place where the rules of the outside world seemed to dissolve. In McManus's telling, this was not merely the product of whimsical design, it was the deliberate crafting of an environment in which reality could be shaped according to the preferences of a single individual. Her vantage point as a maid meant she was privy to the rhythms that animated the estate behind its storybook facade. Daily life was orchestrated like an elaborate production, where the timing of deliveries, the arrangement of decor, and the presence of guests were all part of an unspoken script. Even the choice of staff uniforms, the music playing in various rooms, and the scents from the kitchens were not accidental. This kind of micromanaged sensory environment reinforced the central fantasy that Neverland was a magical refuge. But within the contours of McManus's revelations, these choices took on new meaning as methods of impression management. One of the underappreciated aspects of her account was the sheer logistical control exercised over movement within the property. McManus described how various zones in the ranch required specific keys or codes, and how access could be restricted at a moment's notice. These limitations created a layered geography of trust where only a handful of people could enter certain rooms or passageways. The result was an estate that was both sprawling and compartmentalized, a place where one could live for weeks without ever knowing what happened in other parts of the grounds. This compartmentalization, while common in large estates, took on an entirely different cast when paired with her allegations about secretive behavior. Her account also offered insight into the ways in which opulence itself can be a shield. The overwhelming scale of Neverland's amenities, the amusement park rides, zoo, arcade, and theater, was enough to dazzle any guest, adult, or child. In this sea of distractions, smaller details could easily escape notice. A locked door at the back of a playroom might be overlooked amid the sensory overload of lights, music, and motion. McManus's recollections reframed this lavishness not as mere generosity or eccentricity, but as a strategic means of ensuring that the extraordinary would obscure the questionable. The financial resources available to maintain this level of control were staggering. McManus's narrative implicitly highlighted the role of wealth as both an enabler and a silencer. The costs of running Neverland were astronomical. Staff salaries, exotic animal care, ride maintenance, security systems, and a constant flow of luxury goods. But these expenses also bought loyalty. For many employees, the pay and prestige of working at such a famous estate outweighed their reservations about its inner workings. Suppliers and contractors dependent on Jackson's patronage had incentives to avoid raising uncomfortable questions. Her observations about the culture among staff were equally telling. In the microcosm of Neverland, gossip and speculation were discouraged, and loyalty was cultivated through perks and access. A staff member might be rewarded with gifts, event tickets, or personal thanks from Jackson himself, fostering a sense of privilege and belonging. This cultivation of allegiance created an environment in which even those who sensed irregularities might hesitate to voice their concerns, for fear of losing not just a job, but their connection to a world that few outsiders could ever enter. McManus's depiction of the estate's security measures was another revealing element. Guards and surveillance cameras dotted the property, ostensibly to keep unwanted intruders away. Yet, in her telling, the same measures could also be used to monitor the movements of guests and staff. The strategic placement of cameras and the presence of alarm systems tied to certain rooms indicated a dual purpose: outward defense and inward observation. Such a system would allow the estate's master to maintain near constant awareness and to ensure that no one stumbled upon something they were not meant to see. Beyond the physical and logistical dimensions, her revelations delved into the psychological atmosphere of Neverland. McManus described a place where contradictions thrived, laughter mixed with tension, generosity paired with secrecy. Guests were often overwhelmed by the hospitality and spectacle, yet beneath the surface there was an undercurrent of unease. This duality was perhaps the most disquieting element of her account. the sense that joy and discomfort coexisted in a way that kept people off balance. Such an environment could foster compliance, as visitors became more focused on navigating the emotional terrain than on questioning its source. One striking feature of her story was the way celebrations and special events were orchestrated. Birthdays, holidays, and spontaneous parties were grand affairs, often involving elaborate decorations, themed activities, and extravagant gifts. While these gatherings reinforced the image of Neverland as a place of perpetual festivity, McManus's account hinted that they also served a functional role. By clustering attention around these high-energy moments, other areas of the property could be left largely unattended, creating opportunities for more private interactions away from the gaze of the crowd. The symbolism embedded in the estate's design also emerged more sharply in her telling. From statues of children at play to murals of fantasy worlds, the imagery reinforced the theme of eternal youth. This aesthetic, once considered charming, acquired a more troubling resonance when placed alongside McManus's allegations. The visual language of Neverland was not neutral. It was a constant reminder of the values and fantasies that structured the environment. In this light, even the smallest decorative choice could be read as part of a larger narrative about innocence, control, and the suspension of adult authority. Her narrative also illuminated the role of isolation in sustaining this constructed reality. Neverland's remote location meant that visits were deliberate, not casual. The journey to the ranch created a psychological threshold, reinforcing the idea that one was leaving the ordinary world behind. Once inside, the sheer scale of the property and the absence of external observers allowed for a kind of social vacuum, where norms could be reshaped according to the will of the central figure. McManus's account underscored how this isolation was not just geographic, but cultural, insulating the estate from external influence or oversight. The way McManus described interactions with Jackson's guests was particularly notable. Visitors often arrived with high expectations, drawn by the mystique of meeting one of the world's most famous performers. In her account, this excitement made them more susceptible to the rhythms and rituals of Neverland, from scheduled tours to spontaneous invitations. The aura of exclusivity encouraged guests to accept unusual arrangements or requests without question, framing them as part of the unique experience. This subtle social engineering contributed to the sense that anything was permissible within the ranch's borders. Her recollections of the estate's inner sanctums were among the most compelling aspects of her revelations. Certain rooms, she suggested, were not part of the public narrative of Neverland at all. They were concealed by design, accessible only through discreet hallways or unmarked doors. The existence of such spaces challenged the public's understanding of the property, raising questions about what they were used for and why they were so carefully hidden. In a place already saturated with luxury and excess, the need for secrecy around these areas hinted at activities that could not withstand scrutiny. The interplay between reality and performance in McManus's account cannot be overstated. Every guest's experience of Neverland was a curated event, from the moment they entered to the moment they left. Staff were instructed to maintain certain standards of presentation at all times, ensuring that the illusion of perfection was never broken. Yet behind this performance, McManus suggested, there was another reality, a version of the estate that only a select few ever saw. The tension between these two versions of Neverland formed the backbone of her most unsettling claims. Even the treatment of animals at the ranch carried symbolic weight in her telling. The exotic species housed on the property, from giraffes to elephants, added to the sense of wonder. But they also reinforced the idea that Neverland operated according to its own rules. These animals, like the human guests, were part of the spectacle, their presence enhancing the aura of otherworldliness that insulated the estate from ordinary expectations. The care and display of such creatures required immense resources, yet McManus's account hinted that their role was as much about image as it was about genuine affection for wildlife. Her recollections also touched on the sensory dimensions of life at the ranch. The constant music, the scent of flowers and baked goods, the feel of lush fabrics and perfectly maintained grounds. All of these sensory elements were part of the immersion. While such attention to detail might seem benign, in the context of her allegations, it suggested a deliberate effort to keep guests anchored in the fantasy, minimizing the likelihood that they would focus on anything beyond the curated experience. The management of time at Neverland was another subtle but powerful form of control. Without the markers of ordinary life, commutes, school schedules, or external obligations, guests could lose track of the hours and days. This fluidity of time created an environment where routines were dictated entirely by the host's preferences. McManus's account implied that this temporal disorientation could make it easier to guide interactions and manage the flow of events in ways that serve the central figure's interests. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on Adrian McManus revealing shocking Neverland secrets about Michael Jackson? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching and see you next time.